The next question I have is regarding childcare. The federal government has committed $10.2 billion in ensuring $10 a day daycare, but there aren't enough spaces or registered early childhood educators to meet the target. In your view, should the city use property taxes or development charges meant for local infrastructure to meet the federal government targets? Or, in the alternative, what would be your proposal so that we can fill this gap? I will start with Mr. Lee.
I just want to start with something, statistics. I heard somewhere, I read somewhere that 30% of the public housing, I don't know, homeless housing shelters that we have in the city is occupied by the refugees. 30%, think about that. It's a federal program, and we're working with the federally, and we could have housed 30% of the Torontonians who are homeless in those shelters. We need to make sure that the federal government pays their share of the program. 30%. Just think about that. And what was the question again? Childcare. All right. The same thing with childcare. They're giving us money. I believe roughly around $3,700 or $4,000, almost $4,000 a child per quarter. Raise your hands if you could afford one child in a child care for $4,000 a year. Is it realistic? Absolutely not. It's not realistic. It is a federal target that they want to accomplish $10 a child. $10 a child. It is not our target. We have to make sure that we let the federal government know that we don't have enough funding to do that. And work with the provinces so that they came up with the funding for the infrastructure within the child care buildings, so that operationally the city can take over. But city should not be putting up our property tax money towards something that we did not promise, federal government promised. And why is it that the taxpayers, our property taxpayers, have to be paying for the bill? To me, that does not make sense. If I'm elected, I will protect, I'll fight for the taxpayers in Willowdale. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you. I don't think anybody is proposing right now that it would come from the property tax base of the City of Toronto to cover the subsidies to bring down the fees to $10 a day. That's an agreement between the federal and provincial governments. It has very little to do with the city, so there's not going to be an impact on our property taxes. And to be clear, even property taxes are meant for city services. They don't deal with capital needs, things like building new childcare centres. Where we do have to be very concerned is, and I dealt with the wait list issues in an earlier comment, and how difficult it is to find a childcare space in the neighborhood today. If those prices come down, they are going to become much more attractive to more families. This is the reason for the program, is to be encouraging more young parents to be able to get back into the workforce more quickly, to take advantage of those resources. But that's going to ratchet up the demand. And the gap right now is figuring out the infrastructure. How are we going to build out the centres? How are we going to create the spaces to meet the demand, particularly in the high growth areas like Willowdale, where finding spaces are already a challenge? So the answer to that is a couple of things. Number one, getting the city to change the way that it approaches development charges and what's now known as community benefit charges, because historically the city will collect money from high growth areas, spread it across the city, in particular to neighborhoods that are more economically disadvantaged. And it means that places like Willowdale, where we do have a higher percentage of parents able to afford childcare fees, they just can't find the spaces because the city isn't building the centres here. Provincial rules in terms of funding have changed over the last couple of years. So we are going to be getting, as a city, about 30% of what we used to get from development to pay for this sort of infrastructure and these sorts of services. which is again why we're going to need to be more creative. It is why we are going to need to increasingly be able to sit down with developers and say, look, we understand that the province is putting a push on growth. We understand that the Ontario Lands Tribunal, used to be the Ontario Municipal Board, is going to grant a lot more density than we want and can probably handle. But if we get to a point to look at a 30-story condominium building that's coming into the area, and we know it's going to get built one way or the other, why not go and say, look, we can do an extra 2 floors on top, they're going to make more money for you, and in exchange, give us 1 floor on the bottom. We're going to put the childcare center in there. We are going to get you've already got the land, you're going to put up the external walls, and then all the city has to do is come up with the money to do the interior finishings. It's a much more cost-effective way to do it. We have been successful at building probably a half a dozen childcare centers, either currently in development or recently opened in the neighborhood, using that model. That's the experience I would like to bring to the table because I know how to get that done, and we can make that happen.
So expensive childcare really does impact women. I know so many women who stop their careers because childcare is not accessible or affordable, and I think it's ridiculous that we have to put our names on waiting lists before we're even pregnant to even have a chance. I think Young Hearts is one of those daycares that's almost impossible to get into. So we really do need to invest in daycares, and something that really bothers me is that we see it as a benefit. A community benefit sounds to me like icing on the cake, but it shouldn't be a bonus. Oh, I negotiated a bonus to have daycare. Daycare should be critical infrastructure, just like schools are critical. And so we really need to look at daycares in a different way and advocate for a different kind of funding that allows us to build daycares that are not just tied to negotiating with developers, because not every part of our community has new development going up, but every part of our community needs daycare. So I still think the idea of partnering with local faith communities that have buildings that are sprinkled throughout our neighborhood, some of these buildings need some revitalization, and I think there are some great opportunities for partnership where we can build not just daycares, but also early on centers. So I advocated for one on Yonge Street because when I was a mom, I had to get in a car and drive to find a place where I could take my baby. And I saw so many moms on Yonge Street, and I thought, why don't we have one here? Well, 7 years later, and now my kids are too big for it, they finally opened, and it's a beautiful space. But it's already like Hunger Games trying to get a spot. So moms with babies can't even count on getting a spot to go because it's so competitive. So we not only need daycares, we also need early on centers, which are parent-child family centers that can support the growing population in our neighborhood. And we can make that happen by partnering with local faith communities to make sure that the spaces can be revitalized and used in this way. Thank you.
Thank you.